Welcome. Today I'll be talking about Anja Carr's practice as both an artist and as a gallerist. And the following points will be discussed. The problem with video documentation, the space, childhood dream world, bodily materials, furries, the staging of oneself, collaborations and pink cube. The video presented on your arrival is a documentation of a performance called The Taste of Death is on My Tongue. I feel something that is not from this world. The performance was a collaboration with pianist Anja Carr and bodybuilder Daniel Stisen. The title of the performance is taken from what is claimed to be Mozart's last words before his death. The music is worked by Mozart, played on a grand piano that also works as a scenographical element. As you witness, this video has, to put it very nicely, several flaws. First of all, the quality is bad. The result of candles being the only light source, the characters and the deep colours disappears. You can't even see the taxidermed raven on top of the curtains, which in this performance was meant to embody death itself. This is a picture of it. The reason for showing this video is not to analyse the specific performance or to raise any questions of its quality, but to give you an example of Carr's struggle with video documentation. This struggle is actually the background for her latest works, which I now will try to explain. Because video is a sort of framing of a story. In the case of documentation, it's often made from a camera fixed on a tripod, like in this case. One thing is that you miss the natural movement towards the work when you enter the room and you try to make yourself comfortable in the unknown setting. Another thing is, if you have access to the video, you can play the story over and over again. With the live performance art, the frame has the exact opposite function. The performance is made for a specific time and space. There is an unexpectedness tied to the art form that gets lost when being captured as a video. Together with this experience of seeing something for the first time, we also miss out on the presence of the body, the interactions between the people present and the performance act itself. The video can't give you the actual feeling of being there. The most important part, the physical experience, is lost. To make this very clear, to watch this video, where you now sit in a comfortable distance, is a very different experience than struggle through a snowstorm in -22 degrees, which was the case with this. Be crammed together in a small venue, listen to classical works by Mozart for 20 minutes, to the point where you almost fall asleep. And then you're disturbingly woken up by this glossy bodybuilder with very little clothing on, and has absolutely no sense of respect for comfort zones, showing off his muscles, like you can smell the testosterone. And then this pink bunny is looking at you, eating carrots as if nothing weird is going on. This is the reason why Carr stopped using video as a documentation medium for her performances. For those familiar with Carr's practice, it might seem odd to bring up the discussion of documentation. But documentation is an essential part of her work, especially her most recent works. For Carr, it's not just about the necessity of having documentation available for applying to this and that, we call it scholarship, or like most artists do. The documentation becomes a new work in itself, which is called is an ongoing photography series called Moments. If I start to show you, this is the pink little bunny. As the title suggests, this is Moments and only Moments. She presents only one photograph from each performance. While video shows so much of an experience that it actually removes too many important elements, she discovered that photography shows so little that it opens up for further explorations. In this way, she gives her performance works new life, in a new frame that does not include time and space in the same way as video. With photography, the time spent in front of the piece is up to the viewer. Photographs, when presented as documentation of performance, makes you wonder what you missed, what is not being presented to you. You have to imagine the smell, the temperature, and most importantly, the narrative, the stories. And these are two examples of the series moments. By placing one photograph from each performance together in a series, they become scenes in a new story. There is, as you see, several visual links between the works, as if they come from the same imaginary universe. But the audience has to put these fragments together to form a narrative. This, of course, opens up for many different stories. As an audience, you become the storyteller, a more active participant. And this is an important aspect in all of our works, and something we'll experience on different levels throughout this presentation. This is from Hedmark Art Center, where you can see the photography series in the back. And the reason for showing this is because even though the photographies are a constant element by nature, the narrative and their inner logic not only change depending on who is looking, but also according to where and how they are presented. And this can be said of many works in general, but for Carr this is an essential part of the working process. All of her works end up in some kind of installation. The photography also starts as an installation, because the performances takes place in a scenography or an installation. And then again, if she exhibits photographies, they become part of the composition in the room as a whole. For her, the characteristics of the room the artwork is placed in, and the dialogue between them, is as important as the presence of the body. She does have a special interest in intimate spaces, and she does explore this in several different ways. This is from a dollhouse exhibition. The first time I was introduced to the photography series Moments was a complete opposite setting from the concrete wall building where The Taste of Death is on My Tongue, I Feel Something Is Not From This World was performed, as was the video showed on the way in. The exhibition in question was called There Is No Place Like Home, and took place in the actual home of the gallerist. More specifically, in a dollhouse in the garden of his childhood home on a hot summer day last year. He had the experience of intimacy, and privacy was expressed in a very different way. This is the concept of the gallery dollhouse, which fit very well with the content of Carr's work. This is the dollhouse seen from the outside, so you see that it's not very big. Petite. It was an ambivalent feeling taking the bus to what felt like the middle of nowhere and walking straight into somebody's garden for show in a little dollhouse. The private and its connection to the public is explored in various ways in Carr's practice, and I'll get back to that later on when I talk about a gallery space. But with the dollhouse show, we didn't just walk into somebody's private property. For an exhibition, we also invaded the actual space where somebody's childhood fantasies were once created. This was, of course, no coincidence, because our work did really fit perfectly into the scenery. And I'm going to show you another part of the series, which is this fish picture. Most of her recent work built on childhood memories and infantile desires, as one so nicely says. This is exemplified through her use of specific bright colours and fantasy figures like My Little Pony or Miss Piggy, which most children of the 80s have a common relationship with, myself included. What happens when you find yourself facing these childhood memories 20 years later? These are questions that are important to Carr. And as the gallerist of the dollhouse so nicely put it, references to the childhood are problematic because they remind us of what we once were. This is part of the ambivalent feeling I mentioned earlier. A feeling of common references from a now lost world, which no longer seems meaningful. And to find meaning in these works, you'll have to abandon your grown-up sense of logic and dig into your childhood fantasies. So, what Carr creates are dream worlds. an escape from a world based on norms and rules. A huge fish with an apple in his mouth, or a reindeer with a pig mask and wearing a ponytail can seem odd when you hear about it, but when you interact with them in the spaces Carr creates, it's like they have their kind of inner logic, a sort of dream logic. But as with dreams, what looks like one thing can suddenly become something completely different. Here is another picture from the Moments series. Several of the figures certainly look like they come straight from a children's program. But when you take a closer look, you realize that some of the activities are not exactly what they ought to be. Carr examines here how an adult sexualized gaze can create multiple layers of meaning. She's touching taboos in the assemblage of childishness and sexuality. It can easily go from a perfect dream to more of a nightmare when you discover the details. Like with this, for example. This is a work from an exhibition at Premise in Bergen. All of a sudden you realize that it's this adorable rainbow, this childish, lovely rainbow, turns out not to contain golden coins at the end. For some, this may cause a sudden need for keeping a distance. But as was the case with this show, dogs or children might find it the most attractive piece in the whole exhibition. This underlines Carr's interest in the visual language and his strengths as a non-authoritarian, something you can experience without concern or knowledge of the spoken word. The use of excrement is another way of touching upon taboo elements. She's placing something very natural in a very unnatural setting, and through this she transforms the meaning of the object into something new. This is the kind of shifts you often experience in dreams, and we're back to the dreams again, where a familiar situation or object turns into something unknown. For the dog visiting this exhibition, it was probably easy to discover that the shit was from a human, not a dog. For everybody else, this was more of a sneaking suspicion, which you later got confirmed through this video I'm about to show you, which was a part. It's called Mule. This is a long video. Even though it seems odd that I just talked about that she stopped using video documentation as a medium for documenting, video as a way to document performances. This is a video work, so it was meant for the video in the first place. Carr's idea is not to provoke, but to break with the expectations. With the rainbow situation, you expect something cute and nice to bring you to nostalgia, but instead it breaks the magical atmosphere with the life-size pony having a dump on it. So what at first comes off as a children's figure soon have to deal with reality. In another work, this one, she also combined reality with play. This was displayed at Pot Syd in Bergen, where she transformed a whole room into a pigsty. And the dreamlike shift happens via the video to the installation in the room. The video documents an interaction between the artist in a pig costume and real pigs. So the traces of this interaction comes in the form of excrements on the exhibition floor. But it's not only the shifts that can be read as a thread throughout her artistic career. The use of organic materials is a typical trace. Her intention is to activate the audience by creating a certain kind of sensual communication through smell, taste and/or touch. She makes a childhood fantasy into reality, but of course by doing this she disturbs some of the magic. Carr's use of organic material have been seen in relation to the term objection, as in Vogue magazine in an interview by Lisa Stålspets. The French philosopher Julia Kristeva described objection as a meeting with taboo items in the wrong place, where corpse body waste or contempt for food creates emotional closeness, but disturbs our identity. In another installation at the same show, there is an empty rabbit costume hanging by, in this show, I'm sorry, there's an empty rabbit costume hanging by a chain with its head downwards, as you see in the back. His face and arms head down towards the lawn on the floor, reaching for the carousel sticking up, instead of being hidden underneath, which they usually would have been. The trace of something former taking place, an index of an earlier performance is revealed by the photography series Moments in the back there, where this scenography comes to life. Death itself is explored both by the fragmentation of memory, as in the photography, and its leftover trace placed as an installation in the exhibition. During the show, they will start to rot, start resembling feces, whereas fresh carrots, they can also be seen as symbolizing a penis. According to Carr, an inspirational source for this installation was Yayoi Kusama, and some of you might know her work, some of you might not. But this work is a tribute, and it's titled Yay, Oi Oi Oi. There you go. As a comment to her installation scenarios, Carr said in an interview, "I often create ambiguous scenarios. I'm interested in situations where there is a possibility of a transformation over time. Subject, identities, power relations, or materials." In You Make Me, I Make You, you find another kind of transformation. Here from object to subject. In this piece, you're met by a life-size, bacon-wrapped male figure with a pig mask for a head. He's holding a camera in his hand, which is turned towards you, in many cases, or just downwards, as in this case here. An umbilical cord going from the pig man's stomach connects him to the female pig figure lying deflated on the bed. Her body is an empty costume and she's watching the TV that is next to the bed. The empty shell versus the male figure without skin creates an interesting doubling, as if there are two parts of the same thing. Maybe a comment on motherhood. Nevertheless, there is an interesting relation between object-subject going on. The camera the male figure is holding is turned outwards, but it's not like he's holding it up to his eye, like if he's taking a photograph. He's holding it more as a power tool, as a subtle statement about something that can occur. And we're back to this just to see him in front. Anja Carr had an interesting explanation to the inspiration for this work, which she explained in an interview, and I'm just going to quote her on it. I was stopped by a tourist in the street who wanted me to take his picture. At first he was happy. Then he started to criticize the images I took and suddenly grabbed my arm and wanted to take pictures of us two together. When I refused, he instead began to take pictures of me. I told him to stop, but he just kept snapping away. The bacon pig who is holding the camera came out of that experience. The fast shift from subject to object, and the camera as a weapon of power, a trap, was interesting to me. However, I think the visual language, also the figurative, works like a mirror. The spectator sees his own experiences in the work. The stories you make up when interpreting the work point back at you instead of me, like the camera lens in this installation. And I'll look at this. An even more unmistakable example of the physical interaction between the works and the audience is an installation exhibited on a recent solo exhibition at Trøndelag Center of Contemporary Art in Trondheim in December last year. In this picture you see the audience sitting in the installation watching a video. You see it in the back. And when you sit down in the furry sofa to watch the video, you realize that the creatures you are watching is sitting in the same sofa, in the same scenography as you are. This is the sofa. This is people watching. Some of you might recognize one of them. And this is a video still from the installation. You are most obviously inside the work. You are part of the work in the same way as you can suddenly be inside a fairy tale or swimming among a big fish in a dream. You become a participant who plays a role in her works. Who is watching? As with the bacon sculpture. These creatures that appeared in this video, which is this video, is called furries, which is a subculture where people cultivate their animal alter ego dressed in anthropomorphic fursuits. And Carr is interested in how they combine childlike and adult fantasy worlds in a way that drive today's self-performance to another level. And how they at the same time represent a counter-culture reaction. Dressed in their animal costumes, furries are freed from categorizations of gender, age, social status and verbal expression that dominates the social media today. Most furries only express themselves through body language and animal noises. So like the furries, Carr's performances often include self-made costumes, where she mixes this fur leather fetish with mass culture characters from her childhood. As is the case with the figures I mentioned earlier, like Miss Piggy and My Little Pony. The furries also represents a mixture of animal and human, and like Carr's characters. In this way, the real furries represent several aspects of her work. The type of staging of oneself, as is the case with the furries, is more common than we like to admit. It is an explicit tendency in our mobile everyday life. The fantastic birthday cake you got is posted on both Twitter and Facebook right after you filtered it through Instagram. And later on, when your birthday party hits the roof, or at least that's what you present it as, you send all non-participators a picture through Snapchat. So we create narratives that has an aspect of truth in it, but that come off as more of a fairy tale story than of ourselves. So who knows, maybe the birthday party only consists of yourself, one cake and a champagne glass for yourself. This is also part of the fragmented documentation of life Carr finds interesting. It's the staging of one's persona, where you create stories that is true and untrue at the same time. She's used self-presentation explicitly in several works. She does so by using elements of irony and often placed with the role of the artist. She appropriates parts of herself into her own art very explicitly, as with the pink fringe, for example. The most distinctive example being the voodoo doll, which was exhibited at Akershus Art Center in 2012. There you go. And she used her own hair, her actual hair, to make a voodoo doll. In real voodoo, you are to connect a physical element to your victim, to the doll. And in theory then, if an art collector were to buy this piece, he or she would be the owner of the opportunity to physically hurt the artist. That is, of course, if you believe in the power of the voodoo. The doll and the making of it can further be read as a comment on how the artist is always present in the work and how they always give away part of themselves when exhibiting it. But it can also tell something about the usual problem with capital and power structures, the money the collector has, in many cases, has the power to change the artist's life. However, as I mentioned earlier, it's up to you to tell the stories. She is the creator of the universe, which they are being told, but it's up to you to make them real. In this work, that had a double meaning. For this same reason, I am also wearing this wig. And she brought the scenography, but I fulfilled the story. My name is Vilde Horvei. I'm not an artist, I'm an art historian, or to keep the terminology correct, I'm an art historian to be. In collaboration across of what seems like the most obvious choices is important to Carr and her practice, like bodybuilders and pianists. It's yet another placing of something unexpected in a familiar setting. When being asked to talk about practice, we had a long discussion about artist talk phenomena, and Carr's Day today would be interesting to hear the stories from an audience, rather than from herself. On the other hand, it's not the first time she's done this. She has done this at Trøndelag Center for Contemporary Art last year. I would have given you the picture of the actual performance if it was out, but I can't. But this was the setting. This was the costume used. The collaboration was with Tommy Olsson, and which is one of our most debated art critics. And like some of you might know, a man with a very fascinating dark voice, and he's very good at telling stories, which is what he did. In this, Carr was laying completely still in her pig costume in a bed with hay during most of the talk, and nobody noticed because the other sculptural elements in the show, because of them, they were everywhere, disturbing. But by the end, before the end, Olsson, almost like magic, just picked her up and started dancing around the room with this little pig girl to a very surprised crowd. So the element of surprise is a familiar part of her work, and I assume that is quite obvious by now. So I'll go over to talk about a place where I hope and I assume many of you have been before. This is at Pinkip. So collaboration is both essential to Carr's practice as an artist. It is also the foundation of her gallery's exhibition format. Pinkip is the name of her art gallery and has been running since January 2011, with 14 exhibitions so far. Every exhibition in Pinkip is an art battle between two artists or artist groups from Norway or abroad. The intention being new prolific meetings between the artistries, the pink space and the audience. The battle has the roots in fruitful battles in Carr's previous artistic collaborations. An example is her 4-year collaboration with her ex-boyfriend, Niklas Silén, which is this. This is her ex-boyfriend gaffer tape to the wall. The battles break with the idea of the typical group exhibition. Whereas a group exhibition often tries to make interesting connections and underlying similarities between the artistries, these battles have the opposite function. It is very explicit that there is a fight going on. You're further inspired to explore new unseen aspects of the artworks, but they point out differences as well as similarities in a new way. This is art battle number 5. The Sara Christensen and Jacqueline Forselius. Here, Christensen's bucket was placed over Forselius' video, and bear in mind that the photography makes it look like a very horrible thing is about to happen, but Christensen's bucket was made of epoxy and it's not real water falling down. But fake or not, the placement itself makes these two communicate in a very different way than had they been placed in opposite directions of the room. Together they form a whole new situation. This is the intention behind the battles. A more real example of the physical meetings between the works and the battles is when the pop performance group Everbabe met the living nomadic pieces of art, Mom and Jerry, who got chocolate pudding thrown after them when performing one of their songs. The songs are borrowed from male musicians. When they perform them, there is a shift of gender roles played out. The lyrics gets a new meaning when performed by female artists, as the artworks in Pink Cube get layers when they get new layers when exhibited in Pink Space. I'm going to show you this. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep the whole thing on, but there you go. At least you get the beginning of the part in the chocolate pudding.
Tell me, baby, it's all mine. Tell me that the pussy's mine. Ooh, 'cause I don't want to believe that anyone's just like me. Thank you. So we have more songs for you. More songs. Don't go yet. We have this one, and we asked some participation from the audience on this one.
You get the idea. Yeah. And probably I know that a lot of you might have been there. So there you go. But at least you also get the idea of how the gallery space actually looks like and how it's a tiny little venue. The pink wall paint in the gallery contains bodily fluids from a private ritual, and this is a fact we've been presented to many times through every single press release from Pink Cube. But none of us know what kind of body fluids there is, and I don't know, and I won't give you that answer, and nobody can give you that answer, except one person. This is, of course, an aspect that triggers our fantasy, as with Carr's photography series I showed earlier. Something is left untold, and only your own imagination sets the limit. Some of the invited artists have also made works inspired by the story behind the paint. This is Bodask's paintings. Don't know how well you can see them, but you can see that there's some stain on them at least. Unlike Pink Cube's unknown substance from a ritual nobody knows anything about, we are given the story behind Bodask's paintings. The substance on the canvas is sperm. This truth becomes quite obvious when we're watching the other part of this work. Video screens showing male prostitutes, and this is a picture of this, the video still of them, and yeah, you get the clue. So they communicate with each other in the room. But even though we only see their torsos, their movements gets more and more obvious the longer you watch, and after a while it becomes very clear that these men are masturbating. You can probably see it by the facial expressions as well. Pink Cube as an exhibition space can also be seen as an artwork itself. It obviously breaks with the cleanliness of a white cube, while a white cube brings with it a long history of being the ultimate polished and neutral space for art to be presented in. The pink walls have a very different impact on the works presented in it. Pink Cube can be seen as a non-neutral alternative to the sterile white cube and its inherent power structures. I'm just going to give you this. This is from Bodask's show. I just want to give you a picture of the setting. The colour in itself does its job to change the appearance of the works exhibited. The space has pink walls, a colour that has many symbolic layers of meaning, and is of course not a coincidental choice. Pink is generally thought to be the ultimate girly colour. Most girls have a relationship to it, either it is that of love, ambivalence, or aversion. For Carr, the colour doesn't only bring out a feeling of joy, despite the fact that it for many years has been seen as synonymous with both her persona and her gallery. According to herself, it does bring out an ambivalent feeling. But this is, at the same time, what is so characteristic for everything she's ever made. It's a feeling of something not being quite as they should, but then again wrapped in a very nice and glossy piece of paper. She started this Pink Cube based on the interest for intimate spaces in her own works, and that is why Pink Cube is a small place. But the word intimate has a double meaning in the case of Pink Cube. The body fluids makes it intimate in a sense no other gallery space, as far as I know, has ever done. It might have done, but I don't know. In addition to being pink and containing body fluid, it is also a non-profit space. This is underlined by its localization, which has qualities completely different from a commercial gallery, which in most cases wants to function as a shopping window. To find Pink Cube, you first have to find the entrance, around a corner in a hidden backyard, walk up the stairs, around a corner and walk through a long corridor before you find yourself in the actual pink space. And it can be very hard to find the way out again. You get pretty distracted, and the wine does its job as well. But you get a bit confused. So the hidden scenery, the intimate venue, enforces the experience of capturing time within a framework. This capturing of time and the presence in a specific space is the same she focuses on in her performances and installations. We have almost reached the end of this presentation, but I'll sum it up with a few words, presenting what I find the most interesting and inspiring with Carr's work. As I briefly mentioned, I do study art history, and what I spend most of my days doing is reading, writing, analysing and discussing what, why and how art relates to this, that and everything. In that, I often lose something. I lose a part of the joy that is experienced in Carr's work. So when I meet Carr's work, I am met with my own childishness, my own trying to figure out things. But with this presentation, my intention was not to present an art historical analysis, nor was it to argument for its contemporary relevance. But there is a few things that I need to point out, nevertheless. When living in such a mobile lifestyle as we do, Carr's work seemed like a room for breathing, a place to escape everyday stress. We dive into a childhood dream not to forget ourselves, but to remember how to enjoy every moment. When Carr uses surprise in, for example, the form of excrements underneath the rainbow, she's not only commenting on a feeling of objection, of a break in our feeling of identity, she's also making us wake up, to realise what is actually in front of us. The same goes for the pink colours used on the walls of Pink Cube. They're not only an element of surprise or disgust for that matter, the colour itself is also politically bound. The art world is dominated by men, and with this simple move, she in one sense makes every artwork presented in Pink Cube a part of a woman's world. For the same reason, she also invites more female artists than men. At last point is staging off oneself. She does this by placing herself in costumes and by placing parts of herself in her art. As with the artwork I showed earlier, where a pig was laying in bed. The bed is actually where Anja Carr was made. So she is always very present in her work, but only as fragment, only as traces of a story she's interested in hearing you tell, rather than herself. With that, I'm going to end it, and if there's any questions, you can ask them now, or you'll find both me and Anja Carr in the bar. Thank you very much.